again in this as we continue showing and displaying how we at UWC are contributing towards the SDG goals with our colleagues and students in different faculties demonstrating the meaningful and impactful research that is being undertaken at UWC. So let me firstly welcome you to this session as we continue with our speakers for the day. We're going to have two sessions, and the first speakers will present their research, which is the 5 speakers, and then we'll do a Q&A, which the first 5 speakers will speak on social transformation, and then the second session will be on health as we conclude the day for our research week. So without any further ado, let me welcome the first speaker, Dr. Philomene, who will speak to us today about the factors that determine female unemployment in South Africa. And she is based in the School of Natural Science. Dr. Philomene, are you there? Can you share your screen and start the presentation?
Yes, I'm here. Let me. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, just put it on presentation mode and then your 15 minutes will start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, my name is Philomene Sendyumva, and I'm presenting you for Anele. This is a paper which came from my MPhil student, Anele Mfubu. That's why I added her name as well. So I come from the Department of Statistics and Population Studies, Faculty of Natural Sciences. The outline of my presentation, you expect the introduction and the background, problem statement, theoretical framework, data and methods, the findings, discussion, conclusion, and recommendation. In my introduction, I would like to highlight that in the past 10 years, there has been an increase in female labor force participation across the globe, which is reaching 47% among working age population. The working age population is ranged between 15 to 64. So this is called economically active population. These are the people who are allowed to work. Otherwise, people who are between 0 and 14 are child dependency. Then people from 65 and above are also are part of old age dependency. So these people are not expected to work. Only people from 15 to 64, these are economic active population. Now, globally, the participation gap between men and women remain large. It is currently over 20%. Machireni and colleagues define the gender gap as the difference between the employment rate of men and women aged between 15 and 64, from 15 to 64. Looking at Africa, gender equality in employment is currently one of the greatest development challenges facing the country, the different countries. Hidden behind this indicator is the reality of millions of women who are unable to partake in the labor market. So all this comprise of women who would like to have a job, but they cannot take one due to family responsibilities and also under any other problems. Possibly they're unable to find work. Women who cannot secure a job, yes, these are part of those women who cannot work. They are unable to secure a job under right conditions, and they're unable to find good quality of a job, and they're unable to get equal pay. Unemployment is defined as when an individual who is not employed and is seeking employment cannot find work. This is how you define unemployment, or a person who is not unemployed. This person is not employed, is seeking employment, but they cannot find it. Now the question remains whether socio-demographic characteristics such as age, population group, marital status, and level of education determine female unemployment. So this is what we're going to look at. Going to look at the factors contributing to female unemployment in South Africa. Here is a problem statement. In South Africa, even though women make up a more significant proportion of working age population, yes, it is the majority among the working age population from 15 to 64. The actual number of women in the labor force is still less than that of men. According to Statistics South Africa 2022, female unemployment rates are higher than of male. These are the findings from Status in 2022. Of these women, the majority of them between ages from 15 to 34, and most of these are Black women who make up 41% compared to other population groups. I mean, beside African Black population, there are also other population group which cannot work, but this ones is very high. Insufficient skills. This is due to insufficient skills or skills mismatch, little work experience, and also COVID-19 pandemic have contributed to female unemployment. However, little is known about the factors contributing to female unemployment in South Africa, and this is what we're going to look at. The relationship between socio-demographic characteristics and female unemployment still under researched in the context of South Africa. Therefore, this study aims to identify the factors associated with female unemployment in South Africa. Here is a conceptual framework. I tried to link socio-demographic characteristics of women and female unemployment. Here, look, as you can see, we have socio-demographic characteristics. We have age of women who can work, who are part of economically active population, ranged from 15 to 64. We have a population group, we have a marital status, educational status. Then below we have special determinants, which include geographic type, province, and the province of residence. How are these social demographic characteristics of women are linked to currently unemployed female, or how are they linked to female unemployment? So we have under this dependent variable, I have those who are unemployed, those who are discouraged job seeker and not economically active. Looking at data and methods, this study used the 2021 quarterly labor force survey of the fourth quarter, and the quarterly labor force survey is, how is it defined? Is a household-based sample survey, and this survey is conducted by Statistics of Africa. Actually, they conduct this data each and every quarter of the year. So I used the 2021, the fourth quarter of 2021 to analyze the data. The data were obtained from individuals in working age between 15 and 64 years old across 9 provinces of South Africa. And after obtaining the data, I tried to extract only female who are between 15 and 64 years old. In the study, the independent variable used are age group, population group, marital status, level of education, province, and type of residence. So these are the independent variables I used to check the relationship between female unemployment. Yeah, the dependent variable is unemployment status. Then cross-tabulation and the chi-square test statistic were applied to determine the variables which were statistically associated with female unemployment. So I checked the relationship between these independent variables and dependent variables to see if there is a relationship between the two, and also I went further to identify the factors contributing to female unemployment. So to be able to identify those factors, I used binary logistic regression model just to identify how each of the explanatory variables influence the probability of a woman becoming employed or discourage job seekers. The key findings, I found that the highest percentage of unemployed female are between the age 25 and 34 with 39.4%. So actually, it is clear that female who are unemployed are between 25 and 34, which means we have high unemployment among youth population here in South Africa. And also I found that Black African female has the highest unemployment rate, which is approximately 91.2%. And African Black exhibit high rate of discouraged job seekers with 92.6%. So meaning that Black African females are more likely to be unemployed, and also they are also high among discouraged job seekers. I used chi-square to test the relationship, and I found that chi-square revealed that there was a statistically significant relationship between some independent variables and the dependent variable, which is unemployment. I found that female with tertiary education recorded the lowest unemployment rate with 9.8%, and unemployed women are concentrated in Gauteng, Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, with a rate of 19.5%, 18.7%, and 16.8% respectively. So this is when I looked at the province, and I could find that these provinces, women who reside in these provinces are more likely to be unemployed. If you take, for example, Gauteng, as you can, it's not surprising. We believe that Gauteng is the hub of the economy of South Africa, but still, since more people migrated to this province, it means you will find more female who are not employed, because everyone tended to go there to look for a job. And Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal provinces are included because these provinces are more rural. So since they are more rural, it means that there are less job opportunities. And I found that more unemployed female reside in urban areas with 61.7%. And it is obvious because everyone who is looking for a job tend to move from rural area to urban areas. That's why we have a concentration of more female unemployed. Yeah, so this is the table. I don't need to go through the table because what I supposed to show you in the table, I said it in the previous slide. Now, results from logistic regression. I found that age was significant, which means that being a female between 15 and 24 and 25, from 25 to 34, decreases the chances of being employed by 1,354 and 1,287 times higher, respectively, than female in between 55 and 64 age group. And this is obvious because female who are part of youth are more likely to be unemployed because they are on a job market compared to female who are between 55 and 64. These female are employed already and they are even tending to be retired. So these youth are still on the job market looking for a job. That's why the percentage is higher compared to the older ones. Level of education was significant as well, which means having secondary education increased the likelihood of being unemployed by 2,781 times higher compared to women with tertiary education. This is obvious also. The more education you have, the more chance of being employed. Province of residence was another significant variable, like we saw in the cross tabulation with chi-square. Also, in some provinces, being in some provinces decrease or increase the chances of being employed or unemployed. Being a female in the age group 45 and 54 increase the odds of being a discouraged job seekers by 1,540 higher. Being from one of the provinces of South Africa other than Limpopo increased the odds of being a discouraged job seeker. Okay, this is the table of logistic regression, and what I explained came from this table. Now, discussion. The aim of the study was to determine the factors. Sorry?
Just maybe a minute to give us a summary of your discussion. Your time is up.
Okay. Yeah. So the aim of the study was to determine the factors influencing female employment in South Africa. We saw that more women within the youth category, 25 to 34, and the middle-aged at that 35 to 44, were unemployed. In the same instance, women who were discouraged job seekers were also found within these age groups. And the reason might be that they are still in school or there are no job creation. The unemployment rate is low among female aged 55 to 64 because they are employed already and they are ready to be retired. And the study also showed that African Black have the highest unemployment rate of female that all compared to other racial groups. The results reveal that single women and married women have high unemployment rate. Maybe the reason might be that married female are traditionally are expected to stay at home and look after kids and look after husband, and maybe that's why we assume that's why they are not employed. Women from Gauteng, Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal were more unemployed. I think I gave you the reason. Conclusion, recommendation, direction of future research. Yeah, it was found that female unemployment rate are significantly influenced by factors that include the level of education, women in youth age group, population group, and the marital status. Female unemployment varied significantly among provinces of residence and geographic type. The study further found high unemployment rate in urban area, while traditional area had high rate of discouraged job seekers. The study therefore recommend that the government should design a national employment policy responsive to women's concern, and also there should be job creation, especially among youth population, because they after school they struggle to be employed. Future research needed to look at factors contributing to female unemployment by focusing on whether women have ever worked or not. So, which means it should look at experience, work experience, and also research is also needed to measure the unemployment duration among female population. This is the end. If you have any question, you may ask.
Thanks, Dr. Philomene. Thanks for a very insightful and meaningful research that you are doing. So what we will do is that we will have a slot at the end of the 5 presenters for Q&As. But if there's a burning question that maybe from the audience that they would like to ask, you can just post it in the Q&A tab, and then we will, during that dedicated time, ask the speakers to respond to them. And if needs be, they'll also respond to some of the questions while other presenters are busy with their presentations. So thank you so much, Dr. Philomene, for your presentation. And to maybe get the ball rolling again, we'll ask the next speaker to, you can stop sharing, Dr. Philomene. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Robin from Arts and Humanities, who will be speaking to us about bilingual learning materials as a decolonial crack in Southern schools. And this is the case of Isianswa Yetu. Dr. Robin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Are my slides visible?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Well, good afternoon, colleagues. I'm very happy to be with all of you in our research week today to share my recent research findings from a project that I'm involved in. So as we've heard, the title of my presentation today is Bilingual Learning Materials as a Decolonial Crack in Southern Schooling, the case of Isianswa Yetu. And what I'm presenting to you today are preliminary findings after a year of intense data collection in a school in Khayelitsha. And I'm going to be talking about the learning materials themselves as a data set, as well as the intervention that we've been involved in the school. So to set up the problem for us today, we have a very progressive and inclusive language and education policy which governs our schools and how language is used in our schools. And that was passed in 1997. We also have decades long of international research, much of it hailing from South Africa, in fact, to show the importance of children's familiar languages throughout their education, but particularly for lengths of time longer than the initial few years of primary school. But despite that, in South Africa, we have a situation where for the majority of our learners, they're experiencing an early exit model of bilingual education, where African language speaking learners go through the first 3 years of primary school, learning through their home language or a standardized variety of that language. And then at the beginning of grade 4, switch to an English-only curriculum. And there's been much research to show the connection between failure in our schooling system and this policy in practice that we use. So the language and education policy and its emphasis on multilingualism and the inclusion of learners' languages is not being implemented currently. And so, as you saw from the title, I'm looking at this problem through the light, the theoretical light of the coloniality of language, which was a term coined by an academic called Veronelli in 2015 to describe how our very concept of language is a colonial concept, and that African languages and languages of colonized peoples in particular are colonial constructs. And as Makoni puts it, African languages are colonial inventions, as missionaries and colonial administrations, when they came to Africa, transcribed African languages using the orthographies of Western linguistics. And a colleague, Catherine Kell, has recently also extended this notion to the notion of literacy, and that in fact literacy itself has become a colonial invention, and the understanding of literacy is really centers around English literacy. And so when we talk about people being literate, particularly in South Africa, we're imagining English literacy. So this is how I'm theoretically basing my research and describing the problem in terms of coloniality. And then, obviously, in response to that, I looked to the literature on decoloniality, and in particular, this notion of a decolonial crack, which was coined by Catherine Walsh in 2014, describing resistance, the resistance that comes in the face of coloniality in order to disrupt and upset the colonial order. And in particular, for this presentation, the work of Gloria Anzaldúa, who wrote about borderlands and wrote a lot about bilingualism, describes how the places between the borders, she wrote a lot about the border between Mexico and the US, but also spiritual and political borders, that these were places where subjectivities can be reconfigured. So that's a concept that I'm going to be drawing on in this presentation. So the project that is registered at UWC is a 3-year project or 4-year project. And what you see on your screen is a picture of the front cover of the bilingual materials that we created for grade 4 science that are written in isiXhosa and English. And I'll give you a better sense of what that looks like in a minute. And then the teams of people you see there are at the top, the team that is in the primary school in Khayelitsha, which is called Elita Park Primary for the purposes of anonymity. And that the principal is in the photograph, as well as some science teachers. And then the picture below is of the UWC research team of master's students, PhDs, and staff members. So to start off with the materials themselves, before I talk about the intervention into the school, the biliteracy strategies that we have used in the creation of these materials introduce a variety of bilingual text. So if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you will see a glossary of terms where the same concept is written in English on one side and isiXhosa on the other side, which is a more traditional model of bilingual presentation in text, where concepts are provided in both, in parallel in 2 languages. But you'll see on the left-hand side that we've included something different as well, which is to mirror the language practices of learners and teachers in classrooms in Cape Town, where you can see the speech bubble has been written in a very informal way, in a way that mirrors spoken language that you'll find in the classroom. And in the paragraph of text below that, you can see another strategy where sentences are written in one language with optional glosses into the other language. So in this case, in English, the sentence begins in the middle of the paragraph, they must breathe, ziphefumle, grow, zikhule, and it continues to provide the option in real time for these young readers, another option, another term with which they may be familiar. And then on the top of the right-hand side, you can see the examples that are used for the science curriculum have been used and drawn from the funds of knowledge that the children have with them already and things that they know and understand in their worlds. So now to move into the intervention and the kinds of findings that we had in the intervention. This is the focus classroom in the grade 4 year at this particular school, Elita Park Primary. And so just to describe some of the things that were found in the practices of the class when they were using these materials, is that the teacher was able to generate notes for the learners and activities where the learners were writing in 2 languages. So you can see on the top left a picture of a book, of one of the children's books, where they're writing the 7 life processes in 2 languages. And then below that, you see a picture of children in a group, having a conversation in a group. And what would happen was a form of translanguaging between an informal discussion in the group in isiXhosa, and then learners reporting back to the teacher in English or in isiXhosa, using both languages. So there was bilingual talk, which was legitimized by these materials. And then the picture in the middle is a picture of 2 children reading the materials independently. And what's significant about that is that these children previously coming into grade 4 with very little English with which to learn the science curriculum were not able to read the monolingual English textbooks that are provided from grade 4 onwards. But in this picture, you see them reading independently, not having to rely on the teacher, but they can read the text, understand it, and extend their linguistic capacity in English and isiXhosa as a result of a very strong base where they can access this knowledge. And then at the far right, you see 2 examples of how the teacher has used 2 languages in her presentation. The one is a picture of the blackboard. So as she's teaching, she writes on the board, as is a common practice for teachers, and she's using both languages. The more familiar word that the children will know on the left-hand side, so she's got umgata and then carrots to introduce the new word and the new spelling in the language that they're learning. And she's done the same with posters for the topic on the board. So we move now to the test results. Part of the data collection was working with the teacher in the intervention. The teacher was very much part of the intervention to create bilingual tests. So the previous year, she used English-only tests, which have been expected by the WCED and the school from grade 4, that the tests will only be in English. So she used that test on the left, and then she created a bilingual version of the test. So you can see that the English questions are the same, but she's included an isiXhosa version as well, so that the test questions were presented in both languages. And at the top of the test, the children were invited to respond to the test questions in either language. And we found some examples of test papers where the children have answered some questions in English and other questions in isiXhosa according to their knowledge and their vocabulary relating to that particular item on the test. And what you can see in these examples here is just the meaning making that is possible when learners are expressing themselves in a language that they understand. So the English only response is not meaningful, it's not comprehensible, and the child doesn't receive any marks for that. Whereas the child who chose to write an answer in isiXhosa gets full marks for that question, as they're able to present the knowledge that they've gained in its complete form and express themselves fully. So we took the total number of tests written across all the grade 4s, and 3 classes wrote the traditional English monolingual test, and 1 class, the focus class, wrote the bilingual test. And you can see in the results how stark the difference is, in that the green area is the number of learners who passed the test. So the bilingual test, the majority passed, high majority. And in the English only test, you can see that barely 50% of the learners managed to pass that test. So a very clear indication that learners are achieving much better when they have a test like that to choose their language of output. So just to finish off with 2 examples from the data we collected in the forms of focus group interviews, we were able to engage a large number of people, different stakeholders in the project. So this first example comes from the teacher, the science teacher who was working in that focus class. And she says in the translation in blue below, "I don't want to lie, I was also one of the teachers who didn't really understand this book when it was first introduced. But once I used it in class, it made my work really easy for me because it teaches science in isiXhosa and English, and isiXhosa. So I started seeing my children being more interested. They were very interested because I would see the child is confused when I was teaching in English only. If they lose interest now, it will be difficult for them to carry on with science to the other grades." And here we see the teacher's concern for the learner's trajectory into science in the future. And she's showing that the children, the interest that they're gaining at this young age is giving them a different subjectivity, a subjectivity of competence in science and the ability to imagine becoming scientists themselves. And the second piece of interview data comes from a parent. We were able to engage with the grade 4 parents at the beginning of the project, and also to feedback on the results of the project. And so this parent, this father, explains here that this has made me really interested. My daughter is a person who is very forward or annoying. Even when we're driving, she would ask, "Do you know why this bush is here?" When I answer, she'll say, "No, Dad, it's not like that. Miss Azania said." So she always teaches you, and I didn't know what was causing that, but today I found out what was the reason of her always teaching me. And he refers to the project with the bilingual learning materials there. So once again, this notion of a reconfigured subjectivity, this young girl has become a teacher to her father and has taken that on with confidence through this process. I can see that my time is nearly up, so let me draw to a conclusion here. Coming out of this and looking forward, I suppose, in terms of some early recommendations and conclusions, we can see highlighted in grey that the bilingual learning materials can be seen as part of a holistic approach to bilingual education in South Africa, not only in grade 4, but all the way through, where we're looking at these different elements that are important. So not only the bilingual learning materials, but developing bilingual language policy to enable teachers to be confident in this way of teaching. To train teachers in bilingual pedagogy, bilingual teacher education, bilingual assessment, and a bilingual mindset for everybody involved in the education system, acknowledging that learners' resources are important and it's possible to learn bilingually as well. So here are selected references that I've used in the talk today. And also I have put at the top of the screen both my home center here at UWC and an NGO that I work with that was responsible for the project of developing the materials themselves. And then on the right-hand side is the cover of a book that I've published earlier this year if you'd like to read more. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robin, for quite an insightful presentation. And of course, extending huge congratulations to you and your team with the marvelous work and research that you're doing, making impact in communities. Thank you so much. To our audience again, questions are welcomed in the Q&A tab. If you've got a question while the speaker is busy with their presentation, you can just post it on the chats or you can wait for later on when we do the Q&As. But I do encourage you to post any question that you have at this point, and then we can also still ask it later on during the Q&A. So moving swiftly with our presentations, we're now going to have our third speaker, Mr. Koketso. He is from the Natural Science faculty, and he'll be speaking about the demographic aspects of African female migrants and housing type in South Africa, which is a comparison between 2001 and 2011 population census. Koketso, when you're ready, you can share your screen and start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair. Please let me know if the screen is visible on your side.
I think you might want to use a different virtual background because your face is not visible.
Okay, let me quickly. Are we okay now?
Yeah, your face is visible now. Whenever you're ready, you can start your presentation.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon. Good afternoon also to the members of the audience. I'm presenting a paper that comes from my MPhil thesis with Dr. Philomin Sengyumva. It's titled The Demographic Aspects of African Female Migrants and Housing Type in South Africa. It's a comparison between the 2001 and 2011 population census. I am from the Department of Statistics and Population Studies in the Faculty of Natural Sciences. I will quickly take you through the background, the aims and objectives of the study, the problem statement, conceptual framework, methodology results, findings and conclusions, findings and discussions, conclusion and recommendations. In the past 15 years, migration has always been associated with males. It has always been seen to be a male phenomenon. So there are no enough studies on female migration, and it's a global thing, not only in Africa. And now many researchers have always perceived migration as males because of the history of migration. Migrants started migrating to the African continent because the then governments and nations were seeking what they referred to as manpower in order to increase their productions and demands. Now, the aim of the study is to examine the types of houses that African female migrants are likely to access in South Africa. The objectives are to determine whether the number of African female migrants has increased in South Africa between 2001 and 2011, and to determine where do most of the African female migrants come from, and to ascertain the type of houses that African female migrants are likely to stay in South Africa, and also to identify the factors that contributes to housing types that African female migrants are likely to live in. The problem statement says African female migrants in South Africa are likely to work in jobs where they are paid minimum wages. And most of these jobs are the jobs that the citizens of the country have rejected, or they refer to them as inferior jobs. As I said before, these jobs pay minimum wages. Some of them are below the minimum wage line. The experiences in the sectors are unsatisfactory. This is according to Takoli 2012, and they often lead to poor living conditions. This includes accessibility to inadequate housing across all the 9 provinces of South Africa. Now, knowing that migration is selective, the socio-demographic, socio-economic, and migratory characteristics influence African female migrants to stay in type of houses that are unsatisfactory, as mentioned before. And if nothing is done to dramatically change the situation, it will lead to poor urban planning, it will lead to inadequate housing supply, and it will constrain the South Africa structural transformation. The shortage of housing will lead to an increase in informal settlements, or what we refer to as slums, because these are usually associated with problems of unemployment, and they lead to overcrowding, poor sanitation, and high crime. Now, the conceptual framework is that theoretically, the study focuses on migration selectivity theory, which states that migration is selective according to the characteristics of African female migrants in the host nation and what they are likely to be attracted to in the nation of destination. Now, when we link it to the socio-demographic characteristics, for instance, age, we can tell that African female migrants who are likely to migrate to South Africa are probably in their adult years and in their youth, unlike those who are in their elderly years and those who are children, because most of them are dependent on those who are aged 0 to 14 are child dependents, and those who are aged 60 and above are adult elderly dependents. The methodology, the study uses secondary data from Statistics South Africa. The population census secondary data provides 10% persons and 10% household. This is the only data that they made to the public, and both the person and the household data includes people in communal houses, household, and institutions. I chose to use the census data because it covers all the variables of migration, unlike the other data sets that are available in our country at the moment. The study follows a univariate, bivariate, and multivariate method of analysis. But for the sake of time, I'm only going to delve in the univariate and bivariate methods. The study also takes into account the 13 International Conference of Labor Statistics terminology to restrict the range of many categories in the study and to categorize the various employment statuses. The study uses SPSS to analyze, and African female migrants were selected based on the neighboring countries surrounding South Africa, and they were also selected based on how long they have been in the country. Now, the univariate gives us an indication of the distribution of African female migrants, and we can see by age here that the youth African female migrants, as I've said before, are more likely to migrate in South Africa, unlike the children and the elderly, because they are less dependent, youth and adults. I chose 4 variables. The employment status also shows that most African female migrants in South Africa are not economically active. However, it changes in 2011, and we can see that most of them were employed. Most of the African female migrants are also seen to be living in formal houses as compared to informal houses and traditional houses in both 2001 and 2011. And the data shows us that most of the African female migrants are from Zimbabwe and Mozambique in both 2011 and 2001. Now, the bivariate, in the bivariate, I used chi-square test statistic and phi and Kramer's V. The chi-square test statistics helps us to determine whether or not there's an association between the variables under question. And the phi and Kramer's V helps us to determine the strength of the association. With variable age, we can see that most of the people who were likely to live in formal housing were in their youth and adult years in both 2001 and 2011. And then traditional housing in both years has always had less people living in it. It has always had less occupancy in both 2001 and 2011. The employment status shows that most African female migrants in South Africa who live in formal houses are employed. It's not surprising because it means they can afford to pay for the formal houses. However, it also shows us that most African female migrants who live in informal housing in both 2001 and 2011 were employed. Now, it takes us back to the literature review where we saw that most African female migrants who are employed in South Africa often take jobs that are rejected and jobs that are paying very poorly. Now, in country of birth, the data shows us that most African female migrants who live in formal housing are likely to come from Lesotho, whereas those who live in informal housing are also likely to come from Lesotho. However, in 2011, there's a huge change where most of the African female migrants who are likely to live in formal housing are from Zimbabwe and informal housing respectively. Now, in terms of housing type and age, the findings as the objective was to test if there's a relationship between age and housing type that African female migrants are likely to live in. And the chi-square showed that there is a positive association between age and housing type. And the association was determined to be strong by the phi and Kramer's V. And generally, what we got from that is that most African female migrants in South Africa between 2001 and 2011 were in between their youth and adult ages. This is because for females within these age groups, they are starting to become career orientated. And because of the times that we currently live in, women are no longer seen to be caregivers and childbearers for a primary role. With access to housing type and employment status, the objective was to measure the housing type that African female migrants are likely to live in by employment status. We also saw a positive relationship, and the relationship this time around was moderate. So the relationship was moderate, and this is because most of them are settling for minimum wage jobs, and they are mostly populating the informal housing type. As for country of birth, the results showed us that the main objective was to check whether the neighboring country that contributes most African female migrants to South Africa. And the results showed that there's a positive relationship between country of birth and housing type. And the Kramers V and Phi also ascertained it by showing a strong relationship. One would have expected the migration rates to drop after the popular xenophobic attacks in South Africa. However, we did not see that. Surprisingly, there was a very sharp increase in the number of African female migrants in South Africa. And the literature says most of them migrated because of the special permits in Zimbabwe, and this is because Zimbabwe was seen to be the country that contributes most migrants, especially in 2011, and maybe because of the economic deterioration in Zimbabwe. Now, in conclusion, we saw that there has been an increase in the African female migrants population from 2001 to 2011. Most of these African female migrants were coming from Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and Botswana and Namibia contributed very less population. Most of these African female migrants were in their youth years, and there was, from 2001 to 2011, there was a 19.4% increase. This is because, as I've said before, most migrants were starting to become career orientated. There were measures put in place to make sure that women are being empowered, and unemployment in 2001 was 19%, but it increased with 12% in 2011, and it stood at 21.55% in 2011. I think it was a 13% increase in employment amongst African female migrants in 2011. However, the then employment rate was still low. Most African female migrants were seen to be living in informal housing. However, surprisingly, the majority of the African female migrants who were living in formal housing in 2011 were employed or not economically active. This is because most of them migrate because they know someone who's already in South Africa. So it becomes easier for them to migrate as they will be accommodated. So most of them don't have houses that point at them specifically, but then they are dependent under previous migrants. The study showed a significant relationship between the socio-demographic variables, socio-economic variables, and migratory characteristics. And this ascertains us that migration is selective. It's selective because the majority of the African female migrants who are in South Africa share common qualities, both from their countries of birth and the areas of destination, most of which include seeking better economic opportunities and seeking safety and security, amongst other things. The recommendation for policy mostly is that that there might be even higher increase rates of African female migrants in South Africa in future, because the literature says that there are more access to basic services in South Africa than the neighboring countries. So it becomes a place where it's better for them, including with regard to economic opportunities. Despite the high unemployment rates of South Africa, it's better for African female migrants since the economic situations are even much worse in their countries of birth. The policymakers should prioritize the informal settlements, because neglecting them will only mean that there will be an increase in slums, informal settlements. So we are proposing that they use containers. There's a Grootbrak Mossel Bay project where containers are being used as housing. So maybe the housing departments across different provinces should pay an eye at that, and maybe it should definitely yield better results. And precast halls have always been a method of housing, especially in terms of renting. Across South African provinces, people use precast halls to rent, and most people who rent these houses are African female migrants who are coming from the neighboring countries. So if the government would look at precast halls and see if they cannot build informal areas, make sure that people in informal areas at least use precast halls to avoid disasters that are caused by fire and floods, amongst other things. Now,
So,
okay,
maybe
now,
just in a sentence, just to wrap up everything.
okay. In Glasgow, they also buy land from existing owners of the land. Maybe say an owner has passed on and there is no one to inherit the land after them. The government should look at that to see if they can buy those types of lands and buy from anyone who's willing to sell. Maybe someone who has one or two or more lands. And the affordability in the urbanized provinces, housing is very expensive. So if they look at subsidizing houses, because the policies do not actually subsidize housings for migrants, then this should work out to at least mitigate the issue of informal housing. Thank you very much, Chair. That's it from me.
Thanks, Kweketso, for your presentation. I think we're running way behind with time, so I'll still encourage people in the audience to post their questions in the Q&As, and our speakers will respond to them during the Q&A. Our next speaker is Peace from EMS, who will be speaking on development of an entrepreneurial mentorship model for job creation and youth development in South Africa. Ms. Peace, if you are there, you can share your screen and start off your presentation. Peace, did you get that? Are you there? Okay, so we will skip Peace for now and ask Kanita to share her presentation. Kanita is from the Arts and Humanities and will be speaking to us on the topic of understanding the burden on an infodemic during COVID-19, which is a critical multimodal discourse analysis.
Thank you.
Anita? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Are you able to see my slide?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name, as he said, is Kwanita Basir. I'm a PhD student in the Linguistics Department in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities. I'm also currently a research assistant in the Research and Innovation Department. Today, I would like to share part of my research, which I'm currently busy with, under the title, Understanding the Burden of an Infodemic During COVID-19, a Critical Multimodal Analysis. In terms of the background, according to Maria Mohsin, she wrote that social media is widespread and has altered the way we receive communication about news and just about anything in our lives. And we all know, based on the advent of COVID-19, many types of information and dissemination of information happened online and on digital platforms. And this was mainly as a result of the lockdown physical restrictions which COVID-19 had. As a result, according to Reuters Institute, online channels were used to source news for 82% of the channels that were available. And this meant that instead of the traditional way of sourcing news via either news media or, for example, traditional newspapers, online and digital platforms were used instead. And based on the study, on average, people spent about 2 hours and 30 minutes on social media every day. In terms of what this means with regard to the dissemination of information, here are a few concepts which are relevant to my study. According to Goldbeck and others, fake news is defined as information presented as a news story that is factually incorrect and designed to deceive. Now, some of the features of fake news are as follows. It is fabricated information which repurposes, recontextualizes news media content. There is a lack of normal editorial and journalistic practices. It is limited to the processes for ensuring credibility and validity of news content, and it often intersects with other information such as misinformation, conspiracy theories, and disinformation, which is often propaganda or purposefully spreading false information with an intention to deceive. Now, in terms of the articles which were rife during the COVID pandemic, I would like to share one title which might create alarms. For example, one of the titles in a leading research institute read, "Measures do not prevent deaths, transmission is not by contact, masks provide no benefit, and vaccines are inherently dangerous." Now, in terms of the information which we trust from certain research websites, we need to be able to verify this. And during the pandemic, this became problematic. Next slide. In terms of my problem statement and my current research, I would like to address the following. According to the World Health Organization, the term infodemic is described as the spreading of too much information, such as false or misleading information in a digital and physical environment during a disease outbreak. And this ties in with SDG 3, which is health and well-being, and SDG 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. And here are the reasons for that. When discussing the UNESCO and UN Sustainable Development Goals, it relates to the following. SDG 16.10 reads that public access to information and fundamental freedoms are to be protected. In addition, UNESCO and its partners undertook the responsibility of providing counter-disinfodemic responses to combat the spread of false information in conjunction with other related SDGs such as health and well-being in their fight against the spread of both a health and language crisis. So what is evident here is that we're not only dealing with a health crisis, but also a language crisis. So what are my aims and objectives? Number one, to identify multi-semiotic resources used on social media platforms in the dissemination of information about COVID-19. 2, to critically analyze the reproduced content of the COVID-19 pandemic taken from social media, specifically YouTube. 3, to investigate the narratives and ideologies in the representation of COVID-19 by Trevor Noah. And number 4, to critically examine the social, economic, and political issues related to the infodemic. So what is the theoretical framework that I've chosen? Now, in terms of my framework, I'd like to give you a background to how this choice of theory came about. In terms of multimodal critical discourse analysis, this ties in with multimodality as well as critical discourse analysis. In terms of multimodality, it is the combination of using 2 or more semiotic resources to create meaning in one single communicated event, right? And in terms of critical discourse analysis, according to Van Dijk, it is a type of discourse analysis research that primarily studies the way social power, abuse, dominance, and inequality are enacted, reproduced, and resisted by text and talk in social and political contexts. So this brings us to the theoretical framework that I have chosen, which is multimodal critical discourse analysis. And this can be described as an analysis and elucidation of language use by synchronously using the contextual component as well as other semiotic resources to construct meaning. Hence, the functionality of 2 or more semiotic resources, such as visual images, printed text, amongst others, are used in conjunction when creating a particular meaning. So what are the steps in terms of analysis? In order to analyze a social media text, in this instance, YouTube, based on the social media actor Trevor Noah, here are the following steps. Number 1, identifying which of the modes of communication are present. So these can refer to visual, textual, oral, or gestural. Number 2, analyze the type of discourse or discourses involved. These can involve social media, healthcare, politics, and satire. And number 3, interpret the possible findings based on these semiotic resources. So these involve affordances, the representations of the said event, and so forth. And in this instance, it can refer to COVID-19. I would like to play and give you a display of one of the videos which I will be analyzing in my research, if it will load. Okay. If not, I will just discuss one of the statements that have been made in this video. Okay, it's playing.
From the beginning of this crisis, Donald Trump has been saying a lot of not smart things. He said the coronavirus will disappear like a miracle. He said people had nothing to lose by experimenting with hydroxychloroquine. And he even said that the virus can't see you if you don't move. I think he was confusing it with Jurassic Park. But
so in terms of his first statement, Trevor Noah said, from the beginning of the crisis, or this crisis, Donald Trump has been saying a lot of not smart things. What is evident is the manner in which he said it, the background with which he is framing his argument or his performance, and also who is the main social actor or the main event within his discussion. If you look at the backdrop of his video, there's a Statue of Liberty stating the Daily Social Distancing Show, which has been changed from the Daily Show due to the COVID pandemic. As well, if you look at the Statue of Liberty, she is wearing a mask indicating his adherence of the COVID protocols. And if you look at the fact that it's a Statue of Liberty, this gives you an understanding to the political discourse which will follow. He has also specifically mentioned President Trump at the time to give you an indication of whose statements he is referring to. So these are all forms of satire and figurative language, such as puns, wordplay, that is using to illustrate how, and who the discussion or the meaning of this discussion will be referring to. And in terms of satire, it is also a form of literary device that can assist you in understanding the humor in a situation or a flaw which is being experienced within a society at the time. And he specifically used pandemic as opposed to pandemic to give you an indication of what the content could possibly entail. So in terms of the third statement, it's similarly, he said that people had nothing to lose by experimenting with hydroxychloroquine. This statement clearly indicates his mistrust or distrust in that the statement coming from a president at the time used on a platform for speeches was in no way verified by a medical expert. So here he is clearly giving you an interpretation and insight to the flaw of this statement. In conclusion, what is our role in terms of how we need to deal with misinformation, disinformation, and specifically in this case, the infodemic? Number one, we could make a concerted effort to do proper research and identify covert articles of disinformation. Number two, exposing and debunking fake news where possible. Number three, being a part of the solution to fight against the spread of misinformation and disinformation based on UNESCO's policies and guidelines, and in turn, achieving the SDG targets as discussed earlier. Number four, verifying facts from reliable fact-checking organizations and using available tools and resources to verify information. Number five, staying clear of disseminating or sharing false information. And number six, checking for biases before making informed decisions. Thank you, and I'll be open for any questions.
Thank you so much for your very insightful presentation. I think, again, a plea to our colleagues that are joining in the participants to please pose any questions to our speakers. And after the next speaker, we will have a session directed towards the Q&As. So our last speaker for this current session, before we move on to theme 4, is Peace. I don't know if Peace managed to sort out her technical issues. Peace?
Sorry, I was not able to show my video because it was stopped by the host. Apologies for that.
Okay, no worries.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, are you ready for your presentation?
Yes.
Okay. You can start sharing your slide and start your presentation when you're ready.
Okay, so can you see my slide now?
Yeah, you can just put it on presentation mode.
Is it showing now?
It's showing, but it's not yet on from beginning. Started from beginning. Just below the file tab, when you go slide, and then yeah, there we go. The first option from beginning, yeah.
Okay. How about now?
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Peace Amaka Badoha, and the name of my professor, my supervisor is Professor Chuks Iwu. So my actual presentation is on development of entrepreneurial mentorship model for job creation and youth development. And here the outline of what I'll be talking about. The introduction of the study, background, significance, sustainable goal, and connection between SDGs and SDG 8 and 9 to the studies. Then I'll take you to the methodology and conclusion. So across the globe, youth unemployment has become a persistent issue. So it is not just it is a general phenomenon. South Africa youth unemployment in the first quarter of 2023 stand at 61%, and this is a very serious issue if nothing is being done about that, given that South Africa already have a handful of other things bothering them, which contribute to crime and every other thing. So it is a very serious issue to look at. Entrepreneurship development in higher education is still a top priority, both in private and public institutes. Therefore, it is imperative that graduates put effort in acquiring skills and an entrepreneurial mindset rather than hoping and depending on conventional white-collar job. So this research, why I'm conducting this research is that much work has been carried out on the importance of entrepreneurship. A lot of researchers have stated the importance, the significance, and how entrepreneurship education would help generate youth employment, youth development, and all that. However, the aspect of mentorship has really, people are not saying much about it. So the aim of the study is to create a model that will broaden opportunity for youth entrepreneurial participation. So the background of the study is to create a model for youth entrepreneurship mentorship. So when this model, when there is a mentorship entrepreneurial model, it will enhance undergraduate student skill acquisition through mentorship. Then it will improve entrepreneurial uptake. So a student will begin to take up entrepreneurship as their career paths. So comparing South Africa to some other developing countries like Nigeria, who have implemented the practical aspects of entrepreneurship in all the departments, not just the business administration. So like if you go to Nigeria, if you check studies from Nigeria, practical entrepreneurship education were implemented in 2006, and students from Nigeria universities all across the country, no matter the field, no matter the area of study that they choose to study, they must always graduate with a skill. So be it in science, arts, whatsoever field that they find themselves. So the significance of the study is that it will stimulate practical entrepreneurial mindsets, and then understand the effect of entrepreneurial mentorship, development of entrepreneurial mentorship that will guide practical entrepreneurs, reduce significantly the rate of unemployment. So this study will argue that when entrepreneurship mentorship is being implemented, like if the higher education institution incorporates the practical aspects of entrepreneurship education, that it will significantly reduce the high rate of youth unemployment. So the SDG is a global development goal which set us 17 goals and 169 targets. The objective of SDG is to transform the world, end poverty and protect the planet, enjoy good health, justice and prosperity. Basically, my research is connected to SDG 4, 8, and 9. So SDG 4 is quality education, 8 is decent labor and growth in the economy. 9 is resilience industry, innovation, sustainable and inclusive infrastructure. So the connection that SDG has with the study is that entrepreneurship mentorship would play a vital role in improving the quality of education. So entrepreneurship mentorship provides practical skills and knowledge to young people, aligning education with the needs of the job market by equipping youths with entrepreneurial skills and mentorship. SDG 4 is directly addressed as it aims to ensure inclusive, equitable, quality education for all. Through entrepreneurship, young people can generate their own opportunity for employment. So access to entrepreneurial mentorship enhances the likelihood of success for youth-driven startup and small businesses. Entrepreneurship is a driving force for innovation and industrial development. By connecting youth to a mentorship program, can learn to innovate and start business that contribute to technological advancements. Promoting entrepreneurship among youth aligns with SDG 9 goal of fostering resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization. So implementing mentorship program in higher education institutes, students can learn to innovate business, contribute to technology advancement. Entrepreneurship, mentorship, and youth employment can be seen as a strategic approach to advantage of these SDGs simultaneously. So the proposed method, because I and my researchers are still in the process of drafting out the best method for this research. However, the research will be a mixed method. So data will be collected using interviews and questionnaire. The population of the study include all first year and second year economics and management students in at the UWC. And the 2,836 students will be approached for the questionnaire data. 9 lecturers for interview data collection. Conclusion, around the world, youth unemployment continues to rise. South Africa is not an exception. The hope of many that goes to school is to go to school and learn, then get a job. However, in today is now becoming as if that when people go to school, the more you go to school, the less chances of you getting employment, which is not supposed to be so. University is a place to build, where to build people, prepare them, and send them out to labor market, either with creating job for themselves or working for others. However, most students that graduate these days, they find it difficult to get job. So the aim of this study is to broaden the opportunities in the entrepreneurship by incorporating the practical aspects of entrepreneurship, not just the theoretical aspect, because extant literature have shown that South Africa only pay attention, they only feed students the theoretical aspect of it and not concentrating on the practical aspect of it, which is the paramount of encouraging entrepreneurship uptake in future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peace, for your insightful presentation. And we believe that you and your team will continue and conclude this study and share with us what the results and implications are once the project is concluded. So we wish you all the best as you continue with the ongoing project. If you don't mind just sharing your screen, stop sharing your screen for the time being. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to invite all the speakers to switch on their cameras, the 5 speakers that we had for this first session. Just to please put on your cameras, and we'll now start with the Q&As. Thank you so much. I think so far there's one question in the Q&A tab, and I think it was directed to Kanita. So maybe if
Yes.
you don't mind responding to the question.
Sure. Thank you, Chief. With reference to the question of how relevant are these myths or conspiracy theories about COVID nowadays, this study was specifically done in terms of what was released during the pandemic, right? And this was just to highlight the fact that we were in a health crisis and a language crisis, and the impact of false information or disinformation could have been fatal. And because the title itself gave an indication of masks were of no use, people often had issues with either wearing it and in the process could possibly infect people because of what we know now. So I do feel that those myths might have been debunked, which is part of what we should be doing with any types of information. And also the idea for me was to highlight the fact that during a crisis like the pandemic, the importance of not trying to be part of sharing such information, because this was done on a renowned research website, which for me, we as students and academics often use, and it was quite scary that this was actually published and not verified before publishing it. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks very much. I think if maybe there's a follow-up question, Sia, you're more than welcome to pose a follow-up question. And to the rest of the audience as well, you can still bring forth your questions in the Q&A box, and our speakers will respond to them quick as much as possible. So maybe on my side, just to ask questions while we're still waiting for the audience, and maybe starting with Dr. Robin. I think there's been a report that was released from the education department. I can't recall if it's specific to a certain province, but then there's been, in the report, it indicates that kids in grade 4 cannot read for understanding. So I just want to know, with the current research and project that you guys are undertaking, what can you say about that particular report? And maybe another question for Dr. Philomene. I think what would be interesting now is, do you think there's a relationship between profession, or rather graduate specialist, and the unemployment rate? And if so, who are the best stakeholders to assist in alleviating these high rates that we're currently seeing? Another question maybe for Koketso, it's in your own understanding or perception, specifically looking at the South African climate, do you think the likelihoods of housing trends that we're seeing in the currently, do you think there's a positive direction in a sense of how housings in general are trending towards or leaning towards, specifically when we look at the land occupations that has been happening over the last couple of years? Do you think that is likely to influence occupations or informal settlement and formal settlement housing traditions and so forth? And for peace, I think on your current project, can you maybe share with us, in a sense of where would your the implications of your research findings, which stakeholders do you think your results can influence in a manner of speaking? So I think maybe in order of starting with Dr. Robin, you can maybe give a response on your side. Then we'll move down the list.
Thank you so much, Chair. So you were referring to the very well-known statistic that we hear often in the news, that 78% of South African children in grade 4 can't read for meaning. And that comes from the PEARLS study, which is an international literacy study that South Africa participates in, where there are around 80 countries. And we've consistently come last in that measure. And I think that there are so many different reasons to dig into as to why that is, but perhaps I can draw a connection with our project in that one of the reasons is, while those reading tests are translated into all our official languages, and critics will say, children can't even read in their home language. But if we look at the range of non-fiction texts that an English-speaking child, for example, is exposed to within the first 10 years of their life, compared to, for example, an isiXhosa or a Tshivenda-speaking child, there's no comparison, because the public publishing ecosystem and our education ecosystem sets up a situation where texts are not published in those languages that have to do with, for example, science. So we're hopeful that perhaps as we do create materials such as the Science Yetu that are very accessible for learners, and that will push the development of literature, non-fiction literature in different African languages, children will be inspired. And when they're very little, their parents will be able to read to them in languages they understand about the world around us and science, etc. So thanks for that question.
Much for your response as well. Dr. Philomene, your response?
If I understood very well, you asked the question related to the relationship between the field of study and the likelihood of employment, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, the likelihood of being employed is related to the field of the study. Some of the students, when they graduate, they don't even wait to graduate. They are employed before they graduate. So all this depends on what you did at university. Some of the fields are easy to get employment, like, for example, nurses, pharmacists. Currently, with fourth industrial revolution, those who did the computer science, information systems, are highly employed even before they graduate. Company come to universities to advertise, and some of them are taken already. Others struggle to get jobs. So now the next question you ask is, what can be done for those the ones who cannot be employed immediately? What can be done, and what are the stakeholders? For this question, maybe research institutions, for example, those who complete postgraduate, they can be taken by research institutions. For example, here in South Africa, we have HSRC, we have medical MRC, Medical Research Council, Institute of Social Development, StatsSA. I'm talking about, for example, in my field of population studies, the government, and also we cannot ignore that those who cannot find a job should self-employed. I think one of our presenters presented about entrepreneurship. Why can't we create our own jobs? And also, particularly for women, I think there is a stereotype which goes after women who are considered as people who should stay at home, look after children, look after the sick. I think we should look at women in that angle. We should see them as also part of the population who you can contribute to the economy of the country. Also, we should also stop discrimination. Somehow women are discriminated because they are women. So I think if you can address all of this, we can increase the likelihood of female employment.
Thanks for your response, Dr. Philomene. Koketso, what's your response to the question?
Okay.
On what I think about the housing trends in South Africa.
Yes.
Already through RDP, there's a backlog of more than 1.2 million houses in South Africa. So with the increasing rates of migration, it is bound to happen that there will be a huge influx into the informal settlement. So now it also becomes a problem because it means that there'll be more strain on the health department, more strain on the education department, more strain on sanitation and hygiene. So it is a very deep-rooted issue. It is not only on housing in terms of residing, but it causes strains on other departments as well. So I think, yes, it will increase. The slums will increase in South Africa unless the government does something.
Thank you for that response. Peace, on your side, what's your response?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. Basically, like I said from the onset, governments and private sectors have been trying all their possible best to come up with entrepreneurial initiatives to ease the issue of youth unemployment. However, those initiatives are really not yielding any fruit. So like there's no significant thing to show that those government initiatives have solved. So this study, I think it will be beneficial to both government sector and private sector, as well as the bodies that are in charge of the curricular implementations. So it's just like creating an awareness for the general public, the governments, private sectors, institutions, the university institution as a whole, to take up this call and then see how it works. If it is possible that most of us, English is not our mother tongue, but they made it compulsory for us to learn. So I think entrepreneurship, practical entrepreneurship mentorship should also be made compulsory, since it can help to ease the issue of development. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I see there's a follow-up question from for Kanita.
Yes.
You can use that platform. You will respond
Sure.
to it. We can move on to the
Thank you,
next.
Chief. Thank you so much. Basically, in response to your question, Siyabulela, I understand why you're saying what is the relevance of it now and how do we tailor that. But in response to what my research is actually discussing, it's not necessarily focused on the forensic linguistic side. It's focused more on the critical media side, which gives you an understanding that my purpose is to address the media portrayal of certain events. And in order to do that, I need to look at the semiotic resources. I need to look at the types of representations, whether it's a current event or a past event. And the only reason why COVID pandemic stood out to me is because it was not only a health crisis, it was also a language crisis. And I felt that that is relevant in that what if, in a few years' time, we are, hopefully not, but if there are any types of crises, what are the type of, processes that are in place, and how can we overcome this? And this is also why I included the UN and UNESCO guidelines, because this is how an infodemic as well as a language issue should be dealt with. Because we all know that social media and how we source information is not necessarily verified all the time. We do have AI, we do have certain, tools, software applications where we can try and check credibility, but it also stems, or it also goes down to the actual journalists and the biases and who they're associated with, the affiliations, why they produce a story in a specific way. And the reason why I chose Trevor Noah is because he has a political discourse background in the types of content he uses in his performances. And I find that his content is often based on a current event or based on a certain political figure. And because of the nature of the pandemic itself, it was quite relevant for me to use this data as the platform to engage people and to, as you say, make it relevant so that we can have tailored interventions in the future. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, colleagues, for your wonderful presentations and showcasing the research that you're currently doing and continuing with the contribution to the Sustainable Goal Development and Research at UWC. I think for the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next theme, which is health, understanding the burden of diseases. But if there's any other questions, please feel free to post them on the Q&A, and our speakers will respond to those questions. So up next, we're going to have Mr. Lwandile, who will be speaking to us about the newly diagnosed patient's voice of living with HIV/PTB co-infection in a rural PHC setting in the Eastern Cape, South Africa. Lwandile, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen and start your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Malema. I'm just sharing now.
I think other colleagues, you can switch off your videos. Only Lwandile can have his video on for now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Malema. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Lwandile Tokwe. I am a lecturer in the School of Nursing within the Faculty of Community and Health Sciences. And I am presenting the newly diagnosed patients' voices of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection in a rural primary healthcare setting in the Eastern Cape Province, South Africa. This study was conducted in collaboration with Professor Portia Jordan and Prof. Mari Modest from Stellenbosch University. And it is part of a larger study that I'm busy with, which is developing an intervention for the healthcare team that is involved in the care of the newly diagnosed patients that are living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection in South Africa. I'm so sorry about that. All right, thank you. So pulmonary tuberculosis is a common opportunistic disease in people living with HIV. And globally, approximately 8.2 of the 10 million people who contracted pulmonary tuberculosis were HIV positive in 2019 reports. This is according to the World Health Organization. And while this is noted in South Africa, it was reported in 2022 that there were approximately 8.45 million people living with HIV, which makes South Africa to have the largest ART program across the world. And HIV and pulmonary TB is often referred as asyndemic. And asyndemic refers to a definition where two or more opportunistic diseases connect synergistically, thus resulting in a health burden in a population. And HIV has been reported as a risk factor, which increases the chances of latent pulmonary TB into developing into an active pulmonary tuberculosis in people living with HIV. And as I have said, HIV and TB is referred to as asyndemic. And this syndemic, it poses a strain on the healthcare system, especially in the primary healthcare setting. And it also presents consequences and on patients as they experience an array of challenges once initiated on medication, both for HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. South Africa is experiencing a dual burden of diseases, that is being HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And as a professional nurse who has worked in the primary healthcare setting, I have observed similar trends as reported in the literature that there's high burden of patients who are living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And despite the fragmented guidelines which have been available, made available by the department, the integration of care remains poor, and the morbidity and the mortality remains high in people living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And because of this gap, I've also noted that there's limited research, especially on the newly diagnosed patients' voices of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection, especially in a rural primary healthcare setting. And you would know that in the primary healthcare setting, this is the first point of these patients who are diagnosed with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection, where they are screened, they are diagnosed and managed in the primary healthcare setting. So there's limited research on their experiences of being newly diagnosed with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And this has motivated me to conduct this study in the rural primary healthcare setting here in South Africa in the Eastern Cape. So as I've mentioned, the study aimed at exploring the newly diagnosed patients' voices of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And my research question was, what are the newly diagnosed patients' voices of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection? And my objective was to explore and describe the newly diagnosed patients' voices of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And to achieve this objective, a qualitative research approach was employed, and an exploratory descriptive design was used to explore these newly diagnosed patients' voices. And the target population were the newly diagnosed patients living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And the purposive sampling method that was employed was a purposive sampling method that was used to select 12 participants. And the data were gathered using semi-structured interviews from these 12 participants. And the ethical approval for the study was obtained from the Human Research Ethics Committee 1 at Stellenbosch University, Eastern Cape Province, and also in King Sabata Dalindyebo Sub-District. And the data was analyzed using Tertius 8 steps of data analysis. And the theoretical model that underpinned this study is a theoretical model that was coined by Merrill Singer, who believes that diseases do not occur in isolation, especially this co-infection of HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. It does not occur in isolation, but there are usually factors that come into play which interact with these diseases. And in order for us to understand the burden of diseases, we need to look at these diseases holistically, thus considering all the factors that come into play with these illnesses, such as the behavioral factors, the structural factors, as well as the social factors. These are the constructs that we used in, and they assisted the researcher in probing about the voices of being newly diagnosed with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection in the study. As I've mentioned, The study was conducted in a rural primary healthcare setting. And as I've already mentioned, that primary healthcare is the first point of care where these patients are screened, diagnosed, and managed. And it is usually nurse-led. And this particular study was conducted in King Sabata Dalindyebo sub-district within Krizani district in Mthatha in the Eastern Cape province. And it was conducted in 4 clinics, 4 PHC clinics. And this area in Mthatha, it is considered rural. And it was reported to be a hotspot both for HIV and pulmonary TB. So it was conducted in the 4 clinics of Mthatha in the Eastern Cape, that is in King Sabata Dalindyebo. And 4 themes emerged and their sub-themes from this study. And I'm going to explain describe each and every theme from my previous slide. The first theme that emerged was the experience of being newly diagnosed with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And the first theme that, as I've mentioned, that emerged, it focused on the voices of these newly diagnosed patients living with HIV and TB co-infection. And the voices of these participants were diverse, as these participants were experiencing being sick with HIV and TB co-infection for the first time. And this theme then, it depicts a journey of these newly diagnosed patients who are living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection from the first time they experiences these symptoms of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection to how they were initiated on medication, to how they were diagnosed, as well as the impact it had on their lives. And the first sub-theme of this theme is the symptoms which prompted seeking help. So the newly diagnosed patients verbalized that different symptoms that they experienced, which prompted them to seek help in their clinics. And the most common symptoms range from their respiratory systems, the gastrointestinal system, the endocrine system, and the nervous system, including the skin, which is the integumentary system. And the majority of the participants experienced respiratory symptoms, which prompted them to seek help. And these symptoms would be your coughing, hemoptysis, which is coughing blood in the sputum, and also dyspnea, which is difficulty in breathing. And the gastrointestinal problems that these participants voiced were diarrhea. And with the skin, some of the participants verbalized that they experience dark skin complexion and itchy skin. And with the endocrine system, these participants verbalized that they experience lack of appetite and weight loss, which prompted them to seek help in the clinics. And while these participants experienced these symptoms, the participants verbalized that because of these symptoms, they struggled to meet with other people outside. And by that, it became evident that they experienced what we call a perceived stigma, because they feared that once people start to see them with those symptoms, then they would be stigmatized because of how they look, because of these symptoms that they were experiencing. So there was a stigma that was experienced in that manner. And also what was interesting is the study is that in the rural primary healthcare setting, because of the ward-based outreach teams, we expect that our patients will be screened through door-to-door by the community health workers when they are presenting with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. But majority of these patients were self-referrals to the clinics. So this is the first sub-theme that emerged. And as you can see, these are some of the representative codes that were mentioned by the participants. I've just extracted from my data some of the representative codes that were mentioned by the participants. And then another sub-theme that emerged was the process of the syndemic diagnosis. And also, if I reflect on these patients were newly diagnosed on HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. So when they were describing their experiences, they verbalized that, for instance, when they were diagnosed with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. Of course, with HIV, they were diagnosed using the HIV antibody test, but with pulmonary TB tuberculosis, these participants verbalized that there were different diagnostic methods that were used to diagnose them. For instance, some mentioned that they had to cough a sputum using GeneXpert, while others were diagnosed using a chest X-ray, while others were being diagnosed using what we call the LEM test, which then detects pulmonary tuberculosis from their urine samples. And then also some of the participants verbalized in the study that when they were initiated on medication, some of them were initiated on medication on HIV medication first, and then they were initiated on pulmonary TB medication after, while some of the participants verbalized that when they were initiated on medication, they were first initiated on TB medication, then followed by HIV medication, which is in line with the current guidelines that are available. And then some of the patients verbalized that when they were initiated on this medication, they were first initiated simultaneously on HIV and pulmonary TB medication. And then another subtheme, another section upon this process of syndemic diagnosis was the fact that when it comes to the disclosure of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection, the participants verbalized that they are the ones that disclosed to their loved ones, their relatives, their partners, while some of the participants, because of the fear of being rejected by their family members, by their partners, they requested the health professionals to be the ones to assist them with disclosing their status, both for HIV and pulmonary TB. And these are just some of the extracts excerpts that were used in the study. And then another subtheme that emerged under theme 1 was the experience of the treatment. The participants verbalized that the initiation of the medication was accompanied by side effects, which were intolerable, that they experienced on the medication. These side effects range from experiencing drowsiness, changes in the urine color, which most of them reported that their urine would turn orange because of the medication, and vomiting, which was common. And some of these participants verbalized that while they were experiencing these side effects, they felt a frustration because they were not prepared for this medication. They were not prepared and on these side effects that they would experience, which resulted in them defaulting on the medication. And these are some of the representative quotes that these participants use in describing their experiences on their treatment, both for HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And then another sub-theme, another theme was the impact on the daily living. The participants verbalized that living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection had a negative impact on their daily living. This was evidenced by how they had to limit contact with other people because of fear of transmission, especially with pulmonary TB. And interestingly, some of the participants verbalized that living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection was also changed by the way the people were viewing them. This suggested a level of perceived stigma also, which had an impact on their lives because they felt that people were discriminating or would discriminate against them because of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And then another with theme 2. Theme 2 of the study focused on challenges related to HIV and pulmonary TB medication. And the first subtheme that emerged from this study was the lack of education about HIV and pulmonary TB. These patients, some of these participants verbalized that health education was not provided in terms of what it meant for them to be living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection, the side effects that they should anticipate when they are being diagnosed with HIV, together with the routine monitoring that is expected from them now that they are living with these they're living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And also the lifestyle that they need to adopt now that they are living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. So this was quite concerning as these participants were new on medication, both for HIV and pulmonary TB. And these are some of the representative quotes that were extracted from the data to say that, for instance, one would say that I don't remember that conversation about the side effects where I was educated about the side effects to the medication. No, I was not educated about limiting smoking or stopping drinking alcohol. So these are some of the representative quotes which speak to this subtheme which talks about the lack of education about HIV and TB. And then the second sub-theme under this theme was the financial constraints that these newly diagnosed patients experience of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And it became evident in the study that the diagnosis of HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection came with financial constraints for these newly diagnosed patients. And some of these participants shared that when they were diagnosed with the co-infection, it became difficult for them to continue working. And then they suffered in terms of employment as they had to stop working because they could not function properly because of HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And also, I mentioned earlier that I conducted the study in the rural primary healthcare setting of King Sabata Dalingebo. And it is rural in nature, and people there are, some of them are not working, and they are from poor socioeconomic background. So these patients struggled, and some of them mentioned that they were dependent upon the 350 that was initially enrolled for the COVID-19 as a relief. So they struggled to make ends meet in terms of buying food because they could not afford. And some of them mentioned that the distance was far from the clinic to where they are staying, which also contributed to them defaulting to medication. And then some of them even mentioned that because these clinics that I've used are rural in nature, the participants verbalized that there were instances where the medication would be out of stock and they would be forced to buy the medication in the pharmacy. And if you have money, you buy. And if they didn't have money, then they would not buy, which also affected them financially because some of the clinics did not have the medication for HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection, and they would be referred to buy in the pharmacies. So this also was evident based on these themes. These are some of the representative quotes to highlight these financial constraints. And then also another sub-theme which emerged was the disruption to family life. It became evident in
Mandile, maybe in 2 minutes to sum up your presentation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Malema. It became evident from the study that family support was one of the facilitators that these participants experienced. However, there were some participants who verbalized that from their family members, it was not the case. In fact, it was a barrier. For instance, one of the participants verbalized that he blamed his wife for contracting HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection, while the other participant verbalized that while she was living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection, she was stigmatized and discriminated by the family members, and she felt isolated because of living with these two comorbid illnesses, which is HIV and TB co-infection. And then also there were some lifestyle challenges that these participants experienced, such as drinking alcohol, smoking, and also engaging in unprotected sexual intercourse. And these are the things that is linked to that theme that I've mentioned, where there was lack of education. So because of that, some of these participants experienced behavioral challenges, such as continuing drinking alcohol, smoking, and also engaging in unsafe sexual intercourse, which then resulted in them having poor health outcomes, both for HIV and pulmonary TB tuberculosis, because we expect them that once they're initiated on medication, they will have suppressed viral load, and also they will be able to convert from the TB regimens from the initial phase to the continuation phase, and they would take the medication for pulmonary TB for 6 months. And then another theme that emerged was the emotions. I'm trying to finish up, Dr. Malema. Another theme was feelings about the dual diagnosis of HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And some of the participants verbalized that living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection was accompanied with emotions from the time they were being diagnosed. And the feelings range from being shocked, hurt, and describing this process of living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection as being hurtful. And while that is the case, majority of the participants verbalize the opposite, that they were not shocked. And this brings me now to the first sub-theme, which is achieving acceptance, as it became evident that some of the participants immediately accepted living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. In fact, majority of them, they said that they immediately accepted this diagnosis. And this was interesting, especially when majority of the participants verbalized lack of education pertaining to HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And this is some of the representative codes that were mentioned. And also, if we're talking about another sub-theme, was the lack of provider support. The participants verbalized that they did not feel supported in the clinics with their dual diagnosis of HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. They only felt supported when they were collecting medication and asked about how is their weight now that they are living with medication. But once they skip one dose, then they would start to see changes in the attitudes of the professional nurses. And also they were not educated, and some of them ended up defaulting on medication. And then the last theme that emerged was the need for improved service delivery and health information. And the first sub-theme was more information about coping with the diagnosis of the dual HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. So it became evident from the findings of the study that the participants experienced lack of education regarding their illnesses and side effects to expect on how to manage the co-infection. And while some of the participants were fortunate to be given that education, so there was a lack of standardization in the care that was being provided to these participants. And these excerpts, they explain this further. And then also another sub-theme that emerged under this was better service for HIV and pulmonary TB patients in the primary healthcare facilities. Because these patients were in the rural setting, they experienced that while they were there, but this quality of health services was not up to standard, in the sense that they would spend a lot of time because there were shortage of nurses in that area. Imagine they would, as I've said, the clinic is far from where they are staying. So when they are there, they would have to spend the whole day in the clinics because of the shortage of the nurses and also the lack of medication. And one of the participants verbalized that they would queue for hours because there's of that shortage of nurses and also the lack of education that is being provided. So in conclusion, South Africa is experiencing a dual burden, which is the syndemic of HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. And despite the rollout of medication and the support which is provided to patients, there are still gaps in the management and outcomes of these patients. And a tailored intervention is needed, which can support clinicians, especially nurses who are involved in the care delivery of HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection, thus improving the care of the newly diagnosed patients living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. Thank you.
Thanks, Landile, for your insightful presentation. I know, given the platform, you'd educate us for more than the time allocated, but unfortunately, restricted to time. But hopefully, you'll have another platform where you can share more details about your ongoing project. So thank you so much. And just another reminder to our attendees that you can post your questions in the Q&A, and our speakers will respond to them at the end of the last speaker. There will be a dedicated time for Q&As. So moving swiftly along, our next speaker from the CHS faculty, Ms. Nokwanda, which she'll be speaking to us on a topic, systematic review protocol for the effectiveness of psychoeducational intervention programs in addressing the psychological risk factors associated with non-communicable diseases among adolescents. Nokwanda, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen and start your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Malema. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you just need to put your presentation on presentation mode.
Yes, the screen is just above me here. I don't know how to move it. Oh my gosh. Bottom key here.
You can go to the slideshow, or you can just press F5 on your keyboard.
I'm sorry, my Zoom button are hiding my screen in every possible way. I don't know how to move it.
You can go to slideshow.
That's the problem. I am not able to move the. Oh, okay, there, I got it. There we go.
All right, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nogwanda Bokolo, and I'm here to present my systematic review protocol titled a systematic review protocol for the effectiveness of psychoeducational intervention program in addressing the psychological risk factors associated with non-communicable diseases. Here is the presentation outline. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move. Standing on the way. There we go. Adolescence is a phase between 10 and 19 years of age. This is where they establish patterns of behavior related to diet, physical activity, substance use, and sexual activities that often put their health at risk, and also where physical, social, and emotional changes render adolescents vulnerable to psychological health conditions that can negatively impact their development. However, uninformed and abusive parents often present major concerns for adolescents over all health and well-being, as this may result in several negative psychological, behavioral, and physical health outcomes. Psychological health and well-being of adolescents is a continuous global public health concern. Among the world's 1.2 billion adolescents, oh my goodness, what is this happening to me? Psychological health conditions account for approximately 16% of the global burden of diseases and injury, while 85% of premature deaths are estimated to occur in low and middle-income countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has severely impacted the well-being of these young people and put them at an increased risk of suicide, substance use, and other psychological health problems. Therefore, lack of health resources exposes adolescents to psychological risk factors, particularly in disadvantaged communities, especially in South Africa. Psychological risk factors such as psychological distress, mental and emotional stress have contributed to NCDs. Due to challenging and difficult circumstances, adolescents often adopt risky behaviors. These include unhealthy diet, smoking, and drug or alcohol use, which are often resulting in the development of NCDs. The NCDs among adolescents, the common ones is the obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, raised cholesterol, and respiratory diseases. Approximately 71% of NCD-related premature deaths worldwide occur. Over 85% of NCD-related premature deaths in low and middle-income countries occur during adulthood. These are preventable deaths that are the result of modifiable health-related behaviors that are initiated in childhood and adolescence. So this makes it a best time for applying appropriate intervention in order to prevent future illnesses or diseases. Literature indicates that there are interventions, but they are done in adults, and adolescents have been neglected. There's a range of psychoeducational intervention programs for psychological health promotion that have been developed for schools in the last decade. However, the results are variable. For this review, the focus is on the application of psychoeducational intervention strategies, which are known to provide both disease-specific information, also for promotion of healthy lifestyle. However, there's been a lack of research and engagement specifically with the psychological risk factors associated with NCDs among adolescents. This concern for public health raises the need for effective psychoeducational intervention programs among adolescents aimed at addressing and reducing the psychological risk factors associated with NCDs. The research questions using the PICO method. We have 3 research questions there. Number 1, which types of psychoeducational intervention programs have been used to address the psychological risk factors associated with NCDs among adolescents? Number 2, which types of the intervention programs have shown to be effective in addressing these issues? And how effective was each of the psychoeducational intervention program in addressing these issues mentioned? And the objectives were 2. Number 1 was to determine the various types of psychoeducational intervention programs developed to address the psychological risk factors associated with NCDs among adolescents. And number 2, to assess the effectiveness of the psychoeducational intervention program. Materials and methods. This protocol has been prepared according to the preferred reporting items for systematic review and meta-analysis, the PRISMA 2020 framework. And also we followed the 7 steps by Edgar and his colleagues. Inclusion and exclusion criteria using the PICO method again for population studies that included adolescents between the specific age with psychological challenges or exposed to psychological risk factors associated with NCDs. And for the intervention studies on psychoeducational intervention programs or interventions involving an active component to reduce or address the psychological risk factors associated with NCDs among adolescents. And for comparison, studies that compare the experimental groups that participate in the intervention program while the control group continue with their daily routine. And for the outcome, the primary outcome measures will include any objectives measures of health, and also for the secondary outcome will include measures of physical, physiological, and clinical biomarkers in adolescents regarding psychological risk factors associated with NCDs. And for the exclusion criteria, it's just exactly the opposite. For the search strategy, there are the electronic databases to be used, and the year will be from 2012 to 2022. The study designs are also mentioned there, the search terms as well, and the types of studies. Study screening and selection. Studies identified will be downloaded into Mandalay and exported to Covidence software for screening by 2 reviewers. A tool will be developed in Microsoft Excel for data extraction, and for quality assessment, JPI, critical appraisal checklist will be used, and for reporting, the PRISMA framework will be used. For data synthesis and meta-analysis, narrative synthesis will be the text-based studies will be used to address objective 1 of the systematic reviews, and meta-analysis quantitative studies will be used to address objective 2 of the review. Studies will be grouped according to their similarities regarding the methods or techniques used to address the psychological risk factors associated with NCDs among adolescents. Strength and limitations. The limitations will be studies published in English only, and adolescents between ages of 10 and 19. Therefore, that will limit chances of studies on childhood and also exclude the adult. The strength of the study was identifying best practices on the effectiveness of psychoeducational intervention programs aimed at addressing and reducing the psychological risk factors associated with NCDs among adolescents. Ethical consideration, the systematic review protocol was registered with Prospero, and also ethical approval for systematic review was granted by the ethics committee at UWC. And this paper was already published in July 2023. I have a link there if anybody's interested to read more. And those are my references. Thank you, Dr. Malema.
Thank you so much, Nokwanda, for your presentation. And just another reminder to the audience for your Q&As, you can continue posting them on the tab at the bottom, and then we will at the end have a Q&A session. So moving right along to the next presenter, which is Mr. Cosmos, who is from CHS as well, and he'll be speaking to us on the impact of stroke rehabilitation on the community life of stroke patients in an orthodox and traditional medicine context in Ghana. Mr. Cosmos, whenever you're ready, you can start sharing your screen and start with your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Malema.
I think you might want to consider a different background because your face is not visible.
Okay, is it better now?
No.
Okay, I think it has to do with the settings. I'm struggling to.
No, it's fine. We can continue.
Okay.
But your face is not visible. Maybe you can just put your video off, because it's gonna be popping in and out and might be a distraction. You're more than welcome to switch off your video if you like.
Okay, thank you. My name is Cosmos Yefi, and this presentation is part of my PhD research under the supervision of Professor Antia Roda. And I'm in the Department of Physiotherapy, Faculty of Community and Health Sciences. The title of my presentation is on the impact of stroke rehabilitation on the community reintegration of stroke patients in an orthodox and traditional medicine context in Ghana. And this is the outline of the presentation: background, aim, methods, results, conclusion, and implications. Stroke patients are treated at stroke units and inpatient care facilities, and they are referred to outpatient rehabilitation facilities, normally located to their place of residence after they are discharged from acute care settings. But most stroke patients in lower middle income countries, including Ghana, they do not have access to rehabilitation services close to where they stay due to limited rehabilitation resources. So some are not able to find rehabilitation in an orthodox medicine setting, and they hence turn to traditional medicine setting for continuum of care. A study conducted by Safo and Obiagele reported that 43% of stroke patients make use of traditional herbal medicines for their stroke management. So our study was carried out to assess the impact of stroke rehabilitation on the community life of patients who are at orthodox and traditional medicine settings in Ghana. And we assessed community reintegration of stroke patients at baseline, at 2, 3, and then 6 months follow-up using the reintegration to normal living index instrument. The methods. We use an observational longitudinal study that was conducted, and we use convenience sampling method to recruit 200 stroke patients, and this involved 100 stroke patients at each of the care facility. That is one at the orthodox medicine setting, and then 100 at the traditional medicine setting. And a researcher administered reintegration to normal living index 2 was used to measure the community reintegration of these patients at baseline and then at the ends of months 2, 3, and 6 follow-ups. The data was cleaned and entered into SPSS for analysis, and it was analyzed descriptively using means, standard deviations, and frequencies. Inferential statistics was carried out by using repeated measures of ANOVA and then pairwise comparisons across the time periods for the data collection. Now let's look at the results. So at the orthodox medicine setting, the mean and then the standard deviation of the participants' age was 57.37 plus or minus 11.48 years, and 50% of the participants were males. And at the traditional medicine setting, the mean and then the standard deviation of the participants' age was 60.34 plus or minus 13.28 years, and 40% of the participants were males. At baseline, the mean and then the standard deviation of community reintegration of these patients at the orthodox medicine setting were 60.65 plus or minus 24.59. And then at the traditional medicine setting, it was 27.58 plus or minus 18.51. When you look at the results, you realize that the orthodox medicine setting, they produce a higher score of the community reintegration of these patients when you compare to the traditional medicine setting at baseline and then at each of the follow-up periods. But the improvements were also higher progressively, but the improvement was reduced at 6 months follow-up period. So when you look at the results of the table, at the orthodox medicine setting, you realize that the mean of community reintegration was 60.65, it increased to 62.16, and then at 3 months, it increased again to 63.65. But at 6 month follow-up period, it reduced to 60.14. When you look at a traditional medicine setting, at baseline, it was 27.58, increased to 47.92 at 2 months, increased to 52.37 at 3 months, and then it reduced to 48.57 at 6 months period. Repeated measures of ANOVA was carried out. So when you look at the orthodox medicine setting, between groups and then within groups, we wanted to compare the baseline measurement and then the follow-up assessment periods. So at the orthodox medicine setting, the test shows that the mean differences, the difference between the means of the time periods was not significant. So though at the orthodox medicine setting, you realize that they had a higher improvement and it was increasing progressively from baseline to the 3rd month. It wasn't significant. But when you look at the traditional medicine setting, that produced a significant value. So this means that the mean values across the time periods was significant at the traditional medicine setting. Multiple comparisons of the mean scores was also done at the traditional medicine setting, at baseline, and then the follow-up periods to be able to know which of the time periods the significance was also being reflected. And this also shows that the mean differences between the reintegration to the reintegration to normal living index scores was significant between baseline and 2 months, baseline and 3 months, and then baseline and 6 months follow-up period, all with a p-value of less than 0.01. So this means that community reintegration of the participants at 2, 3, and a 6 months follow-up were higher compared to the scores at baseline at a traditional medicine setting. But there was no difference between the follow-up periods between 2 and 3 months, between 2 and 6 months, and then between 3 and then 6 months follow-up period. So in conclusion, stroke patients' community reintegration improved progressively from baseline through to 3 months follow-up period, both at the orthodox and the traditional medicine setting. And then the improvement also reduced at 6 months follow-up period in both contexts. Stroke rehabilitation also improved community reintegration of these patients in both contexts. But this research didn't look at the effectiveness of the intervention. So this was not an interventional study. So therefore, further research is needed to be able to explore the effectiveness of the interventions that are being carried out at the traditional and orthodox medicine setting. There are some implications that can be drawn from this research. So this research has implications for clinical practice and then further research. So for further research, because there are improvements in community reintegration of patients at both contexts, we need to carry out further research to be able to find out the effectiveness of the interventions that are being carried out at the facility. Then the structure process of rehabilitation, according to the Donabedian model, the structure and process of rehabilitation influences outcomes post-stroke. So if you have an outcome such as community reintegration, which is improving, then we need to also explore the structure and the processes of stroke rehabilitation at these two different contexts. Then this can also help guide the development of interventions that can help improve the quality of stroke rehabilitation in Ghana. And effectiveness of these interventions should also be looked at through further research. These are some of the references that I used. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for such an intriguing presentation and for adhering to the timelines. Thank you so much. I see the Q&A dominated by Sia Wilela. So I want to encourage other attendees also to pose their questions in the Q&As, and our speakers will respond to them. So we almost at the end of our day, and our last speaker for today is Dr. Rubina, who is from the Faculty of Education, and they'll be speaking to us today about child and adolescent mental health. Dr. Rubina, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen and start your presentation.
I don't seem to be able to, it says my video is stopped. So I'm not sure what that means. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we're able to hear you.
All right. Okay, good afternoon. You said Control F, hey? No, Control what? Control 5 to start the presentation.
No, just F5.
Oh, F5.
Yes.
Oh, F5. Some funny stuff is going on here. It just removed what I had done, what was on my slide. Are you able to see my slides?
Yeah, but your topic has now been erased.
Yes, because I pressed F5 and that's what happened. Okay. All right, I'll carry on anyway. Let me see if I can do F5 again without
you can just go
causing
to
any harm.
slideshow if it's not responding.
The stuff is blocking the green thing. So I'm just going to not go to slideshow. I'm just going to go along. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sure you are all nice and tired. All right. So, all right. As Dr. Malema has said that I'll be speaking about child and adolescent mental health. So I did a document analysis of all the national health insurance policies from 2016 to date, looking for evidence of the potential for the NHI to actually serve the mental health needs of our adolescents and children. And to date, there is no clear evidence of a budget or an infrastructure for taking care of the mental health needs of our children and adolescents in South Africa. And that is of concern to me. Sorry, I'm just trying to remove, okay, there we go, sorry. So that brings us to the challenge for us as higher education in general, to get our hands dirty and to actually go to where the problems are in order to get information and data to be able to address the challenge of child and adolescent mental health. So that's abbreviated as CAMH, CAM. So currently the mental health costs globally, and that's not only for children, that's across the populations, is about 13%. But this, we all know, has been increasing since the COVID pandemic. And unfortunately in South Africa, after the Life Esidimeni tragedy, where more than 100 people died within the mental health care structures due to negligence, the findings from that investigation was that there is considerable underinvestment in mental health by the South African government, because yes, it's correctly so that they've been investing in the more physical aspects like reducing the infant mortality and looking at maternal and child health. But bringing us to the reality of where we are, the statistics prior to COVID show an increase in mental health challenges, where an estimated 20% of children and adolescents were living with mental health challenges. Currently, it's actually quite difficult to gauge the prevalence of the mental health because, particularly in South Africa, because of the structure or the infrastructure within our psychiatric and psychological institutions that are more geared to later adolescence and adulthood. So we're also finding there's much research that shows that there's a link between poverty and mental disorder, and leading to youth in these realities being more prone to anxiety, a sense of hopelessness, and an inability to make decisions because they lack the resources. And that is where the hopelessness comes from. So the social implications in South Africa are vast, with direct economic consequences, since only 25% of individuals diagnosed with mental health disorders are treated nationally. So they then become, the people who are not diagnosed then become the responsibility of the family, who very often do not even understand mental disorder. So we're sitting currently with Lesotho, our neighboring country, having the highest suicide rate in the world. Now, this was quite shocking, the results, this research that came out. But we are not far behind. We research locally. Now, most of the research that we are finding on mental health amongst the youth is pre-COVID. And we all know that that has been exacerbated. So we found that research by Thornton et al. In 2019 found 22% of Black youth endorsing suicide, and between 2 and 12% who actually followed through. And the road of suicide ideation is linked to depression and anxiety, with 61.2% of learners suffering from anxiety to varying degrees. So this is just, bringing to us the statistics. The aim of me using these statistics is not to shock people, but to bring to our awareness how dire the need is for the NHI to actually include the child and adult mental health in their actual plans. So there are some bugs in our system. So those of you who deal with mental health, you would know that we use a DSM-5, which the psychologist there is using to whack a bug to diagnose mental disorders. So some of the bugs in our system, as found, is that particularly for children where there's very low diagnosis, is that there's poor management structures, poor identification, screening, and assessment, the inappropriate referral pathways, limited task sharing, limited community-based interventions, and limited promotion and awareness. So I am part of a committee that has been set up here in the Western Cape. It was requested by the Premier, Windy, for mental health professionals to look at how we can address the mental health issues of children within the Western Cape, particularly looking at substance abuse. So this committee is mainly found in hospital settings, psychiatric hospitals or clinics, and we are finding that children are being discharged without any proper diagnosis. And that is what then leads to the trajectory where when they are adolescents, late adolescents in particular, then secondary disorders have actually developed by that time. And that is when they become part of the system, being identified with substance abuse related schizophrenia or personality disorders or a variety of other disorders that are actually diagnosed in adulthood. But the origin or the etiology was actually within childhood, but it was not identified. So where do we start? The only way to start is to actually accurately establish the prevalence and identify how individuals and family systems are coping, right? It is only then that interventions at local level can be actioned, since all contexts are not homogeneous with regard to child and adolescent mental health. So we find that large-scale projects for determining CAM in middle to low-income countries are a challenge. One is because of the stigma within the communities. The other is a lack of awareness. So I believe that if we are able to actually start at a young age to identify what is the very first chapter within the DSM-5, the neurodevelopmental disorders, if you can actually start with being able to identify that and providing support, we can actually reduce the development of later comorbid disorders or secondary disorders. So neurodevelopmental disorders are disorders that emerge during childhood or adolescence and affect behaviors that are important for normal function. And the prevalence, depending on which context you are looking at, is between 10 and 20%. So research done in low to middle income countries is showing a prevalence of only 2%. Whereas if you go to better resourced contexts, you'll find that it's between 10 and 20%. So these neurodevelopmental disorders can affect the way a child learns, a child's emotions, their decision-making capacity, their memory, whether it's a short-term or long-term or eidetic memory. So just for people who may not be in the field, there's a range of neurodevelopmental disorders which can actually be diagnosed from preschool level through primary and even high school. And the earlier we have a diagnosis, the earlier support can be provided, the earlier awareness can be created within the family system to provide support to the child as well as the family system. So these might include intellectual disabilities, communication challenges. The ones that are well known are, for example, autism and then ADHD. And then you get specific learning disorder disorders like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, motor challenges, and TIC learning challenges, right? So the problem is tools and people who are sufficiently competent within our under-resourced context to be able to actually identify these challenges. So the way forward, as I said, I belong to this evidence-based mental health advisory committee who is looking at ways to make decisions for effective, safe, cost-effective interventions for addressing the mental health and substance abuse disorders in the Western Cape. The prevalence, as I said, of child mental health challenges is not sufficiently researched and documented in our context and in the global South in general. So there is an urgent need for an epistemological starting point that takes our local context into consideration, our cultural understanding, our community's understanding of mental health, all right? And as always, funding is a major consideration for such an extensive project. So we believe that the way forward would start with firstly empowering adults with skills and knowledge for supporting these children. Prevention would be the ideal, but we do need to start diagnosing. And we could use media like WhatsApp and other social media to be able to engage at community level, where the aim would be to provide policy briefs for what government can do to improve family and community lifestyles, to make available sustainable community-based awareness programs related to child mental health. So we already have, through the University of Johannesburg, a neurodiversity hub at the Soweto campus, which is a good model for us to follow. And the idea would be to then create small local centers linked to full service schools and the local clinics, which means that the departments of education and the departments of health need to speak to each other. So currently, we believe that our African context has valuable mechanisms for healing that is not based on subjecting people to psychopharmacological interventions. And these are things that we also need to explore. We need to be educated about the indigenous knowledge systems for strengthening the family that have been used with mental health up to now. And we need to integrate those with our very Western approaches to mental health that our students are trained in or on in our tertiary institutions. So yeah, I hope that I've kept to my time, and in trying to be quick, that I have been making sense to people. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robina, for your presentation. And, it just goes back to show how much impact we do as UWC pertaining the research that we undertake, and the different stakeholders that we partner with. And it's just really commendable to all the speakers today, how you were able to demonstrate the level of impact and research that you do in your own respective fields, and feeding on to the general agenda of UWC of making, research count. And at this moment in time, I'd like to invite all the speakers to put their cameras on for the Q&A session. There's already 3 questions posted in the chats. So maybe Mr. Tokwe, would you want to start off by responding to the questions?
Thank you, Dr. Malema. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Mgolozeli, for engaging with the presentation. And I read your comments. And I think when I did remember I did mention when I started that this presentation is part of a larger study that I am doing, and it really focuses on the experiences, but I felt for this presentation, I would just say patients' voices instead of patient experiences. But I think going forward, even with the write-up, I'm going to adopt the experiences of the newly diagnosed patients. So thank you for that suggestion. And then your other question was based on the perceived stigma. In relation, or was it just internalized stigma? For me, when someone talks about internalized stigma, it's more of something like self-blame, that, you know, if you say someone is blaming themselves for for being contracted with HIV and TB, then we can say that that person is experiencing internalized stigma. But when we're talking about perceived stigma, we're referring to the individual's belief about what other people are saying, not necessarily that they have to say, no, we cannot, but it's what this person believes that the people are saying about him or her now that they are living with HIV and pulmonary TB co-infection. But I think going forward, I will go back and engage with the literature. So thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Malema.
Thank you so much. I hope, Siabulela, your questions have been answered. If not, you're more than welcome to pose a follow-up question. I see another question here was posed for Nokwanda. Your response?
Sorry, I didn't see the question. Why can't you use one well-defined three-part question, central question to guide your systematic review instead of having those many long questions? This could be what evidence exists on interventions, adolescents abused by parents. No, the reason why I have all those questions is because they speak specifically to different items that we were trying to investigate. And making it one question wouldn't really be able to dig in to the literature as we intended, because the main thing that we wanted to find out here was, do these psychoeducational interventions exist? And if they do, have they been effective? And if they've been effective, which type was effective, and how effective was it? So we couldn't have put it in one. I remember having this discussion with my research team based on the reviewer's comment that because I think before we had two questions, and one of the reviewers during the publication of the paper made it more clearer for me as well as the author of the manuscript, that it will give more exposure for my study, and yeah, it wouldn't give us the depth that we were looking for. And I'm not sure what you mean about abused parents that I mentioned as part of the background of the literature that I found when I was researching on the psychological risk factors, on what these adolescents have to face as challenges, you know, not to get assistance with their psychological health concerns. I hope that answers you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the response. I hope it answers your questions here. If not, you can still follow up. Maybe two questions for Mr. Yafi and Dr. Rubina.
Sorry, Dr. Malema. The speaker can also, Mr. Abulela can also check the link. I can just put in the link so that maybe he can read some more on the article. I think maybe that will bring more light to his concern. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that. So maybe a question for maybe let me start with Dr. Rubina. I mean, look, there's been so much conversations about the NHI coming into implementation in South Africa. And we all know that, like you explained in your presentation, that the context of South Africa is often not considered in much respect. So with that in mind, do you think there's been enough groundwork being done for the NHI to be implemented successfully, specifically looking at the points that you were raising now? Do you think there's sufficient work that has been done?
Not in the field of child and adolescent mental health, and the lack of any planning for child and adolescent mental health. That there's a lack of in the documentation that so far has been rolled out. There's no mention of that, which suggests that it has not been an area that has been researched well enough. And the NHI unfortunately looks at hospital settings mainly, whereas our children who have the neurodevelopmental disorders would probably be identifiable within the school setting first. Because many parents think, ah, this is just a naughty child, or this is a lazy child, or a stubborn child, not realizing this child actually has a neurodevelopmental challenge. So if the research could be done, then joint programs between the health department and the education department could inform the NHI. Yeah. And that's what I'm hoping our research, I'm hoping to, well, planning when I get the funding to start a pilot next year, to be able to take it to the Minister of Health to say, look, you need to consider this. Well, not myself, our panel, our committee.
Thanks. Before we move on, I see there's a follow-up question from Siabulela asking, how can those mental health services be centralized to remote rural areas? Any response on your side?
If there is that kind of collaboration between schools and the health department, then the local clinic together with the schools should be able to start at least with identifying and thereby supporting, in the same way that at clinic level, children who have toothache or eyesight problems or whatever do get support. And we've got a policy, the health promoting schools policy, where nurses and so on go to the schools and they do checking for eyesight, oral health, hearing, and they also provide awareness to children when they get to the age of menarche, for example, for the girls, just before they start menstruating, where they give awareness or they create awareness of making healthy decisions, not taking sexual risks and so on. So those same personnel at the schools could also be utilized for the neurodevelopmental awareness and engaging with the parents and so on. I'm not sure if that is answering the question.
Yeah, I think if there's a follow-up, then he can type it in the Q&As. And lastly, for you, Mr. Yafi, I mean, you spoke about the orthodox medicine and traditional medicine. And from my understanding, traditional medicine is rather more leaned towards the African medicine, so to speak, in a manner of speaking. Of course, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So with that in mind, I know you said your intervention was not really looking at the impact thereof, whether it was successful or not, but then you were just looking mainly on community reintegration as an outcome for your study. So do you think, and I mean, this is just based on your perception and opinion, do you think there's enough space for traditional medicine to complement the rehabilitation space in terms of patients that require such services.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Malema. Yes, so traditional medicine, as you rightly said, so that is medication in the traditional setting. But when you look at the context of traditional medicine that we did, we look at traditional medicine, which is institutionalized. So we have those who have set up an institution, they have a facility, so they operate just like the hospital setting. Yeah, so that was the site where we carried out the study. And when you look at those sites, I think from my personal point of view and my observations during the data collection, I realized, yes, they're also doing a good job that we could be able to look at health policy to also include them. I know of integrative medicine. Integrative medicine is basically looking at how to incorporate both traditional medicine and orthodox medicine. Yeah, there are some countries that are accepting traditional medicine. So when you go to the hospital, you can choose whether you want a traditional medicine practitioner. And of course, those are people who are trained at the university level. Yeah, but I think basically giving the necessary help and training, they can also be able to help contribute to achieving universal health coverage. Yeah, thank you.
Quite interesting. I'd love to visit those countries one day. But thanks so much us from the beginning up until this point. And I think if there's anyone that's still, Dr. Robina?
I just have one question to as a Dr. Yafi or Prof. Yafi. In which countries are people allowed to choose at the hospital? Does that happen in South Africa?
No, not in South Africa. I know in Ghana, I'm from Ghana. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Ghana, yeah, so we have the integrative medicine. So when you go to the hospital setting, you
That's
have the
awesome.
chance. Yeah, so
You should
you have
speak
the
to the
chance to choose.
NHI people as well, Manir. Me and you will go together.
Yeah, but I think it's good because there are some communities where they don't have access to healthcare, and especially those who are institutionalized. These are people who, given the necessary training, they can also help contribute to the healthcare needs of people there. Because when you look at rehabilitation, for instance, it is only the cities, the big cities and towns that can boast of rehabilitation facilities. When you go to the rural areas or the remote or the locations, sometimes these rehabilitation settings or centers, they are non-existent. And people need to also go for rehabilitation services. So they tend to resort to these people. So I think they also play a role in the health of these people.
No, thanks so much. Extend an invite for me. But no, thanks very much, colleagues, for staying out throughout, and to the research office as well, division of or department of postgrad and research as well for the continued support. And yeah, I think there's so much that we do, and we, like Prof. Franz always says, that we tend to be quite humble about the impact of research that we do. But in this platform, it just shows how we should at times stand up firm and really demonstrate the level of impact and research that we do in our respective studies. Dr. Rubina, is that a new hand or was it from the previous session?
No, it was the previous. I'll wait.
Okay. With that being said, colleagues, thank you so much for joining in today. Let's continue again tomorrow from 9 o'clock as we continue on the theme of health and understanding the burdens of diseases. Thank you so much for staying in up until this time. And yeah, hopefully you found the presentation to be meaningful and relevant to you. you.
Thank
you so
you
much.
for your facilitation, Dr. Malema.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.